Hi friend, and welcome back to Marvelous Friends, your home for all things Marvel Cinematic Universe and beyond. I'm Rhett, and today I am discussing the original X-Men movie from 2000. Let's like the video, subscribe to the channel, and roll that credit. More and more of the Fox X-Men collection is becoming available on Disney+, and this month, most recently, the original X-Men film from 2000 is now available on the streaming platform. So I thought, what a perfect time to go back and discuss the film in one of my 5 and 5 reviews. As always, these reviews are a discussion of my 5 favorite and 5 least favorite aspects of the film. And as I've said quite a few times recently, as I've been going back and doing these older movies in these 5 and 5 reviews, I'm trying my best to be just focusing on the film itself I'm discussing. All these films, of course, I've seen a lot, and your opinions change as you watch them and rewatch them. And of course, we've seen these characters grow and change as other films featuring them have been released. So sometimes it can be difficult to be kind of objective and only think of them in the aspects that happen in those singular films. But I'm going to try my best for you guys. So let's jump into it and get started with my 5 least favorite parts of the original X-Men movie. Number 5, Cyclops. Now, this could also just be my own personal opinion here, and so I did stick it at the bottom of this list, but I found Cyclops incredibly unlikable in this movie. But of course, I find him incredibly unlikable and annoying in general. I have never once come across an iteration of the character that I've been, I'm okay with this Scott Summers. I enjoy the character. I like him. I a lot of times find him very bratty. I find him to be a jerk. I find him to be very flawed on a lot of levels that I find just kind of intolerable, if you will. And this film really didn't do anything to kind of improve that character. And I will admit it might be kind of because of my own predetermined opinions of the character that I felt this way. But this one, if anything, kind of enhanced those feelings of the character. I found him to be kind of really set against Wolverine in this film, and we're clearly supposed to like and favor Wolverine between the two. And obviously that is made even more apparent as we move forward in the Fox collection of films, and Wolverine is really one of the he is really the only character played by Hugh Jackman that is not recast and appears in almost every single film. And so that is kind of a big deal, that he's clearly the main focus of the Fox X-verse. And I think that is why they made him unlikable. But I think since he is the main team core kind of leader, it would have been at least smart to make him, or attempt to make him, likable to some level, but I just couldn't get behind the character, and he was definitely my least favorite part of this movie. Number 4, a young Rogue. Now, of course, being a 90s kid, my main introduction to the X-Men came from the classic animated series. And so I've always considered Rogue to be kind of a core member and at the same age or thereabouts of the basic core group of the X-Men, that being Scott, Jean, Storm, Wolverine, although he is obviously much older, but he appears to be in that same age range. And so to see her show up in this film as a younger version of the character kind of threw me off a little bit at the beginning. Now, by the end of the movie, I didn't dislike this as much, but it definitely kind of threw me off guard at the beginning of the movie, and it took me a little bit to get to that point where it's like, okay, I am okay with this, and it makes sense for the story and why they did it. I do have some other reasons I think that played into this that I'll discuss in this list moving forward, but this really was just kind of one of those initial moments at the start of the film that was like, wait a second, why is she so much younger than everyone else? And I felt a little kind of taken aback by it, like I said. So ultimately I did make that adjustment as I moved forward and rewatched this and the story progressed and all that I didn't necessarily dislike it, but it still was at the beginning when I first saw this movie something that really kind of took some adjusting to get used to. Number 3, missing my favorite X-Men. Now, we all have our favorite characters in the Marvel Universe, and the X-Men hold quite a few of mine. Again, the X-Men were my first major introduction into Marvel Comics, and so I have a lot of favorites that come from that story. And really and truly, I felt like they were missing. My favorites, of course, are Gambit, Angel, and Iceman, who, of course, Bobby was featured in the film, but not very heavily, and he was more so being set up for the later films. I would have liked to have seen some more of my favorite characters featured in the film. I kind of just was missing them and looking for them the entire time when I first watched this film. And that's something, unfortunately, that happens with films like this that are large ensemble casts that feature quite a few characters, and potentially your favorite character from that franchise isn't featured because you just spend your time looking for them, and it can be a little bit of a distraction. Unfortunately, I even will say this with some future knowledge here, I wasn't a big fan with how my favorite characters ended up being used for the most part, that being Angel and Gambit. Bobby, aka Iceman, I grow to love his character and enjoy how he's used moving forward, and especially in his Days of Future Past appearance. But at this point, I just was missing my favorite characters from the comic books. Number 2, Wolverine and Sabretooth. In this film, we are established the fact that Wolverine does not remember anything before his procedure that gave him his adamantium claws. And I guess this is how they justified the fact that Wolverine doesn't know who Sabretooth is, because when he is mentioned by the other X-Men, he kind of scuffs it off and doesn't seem to recognize the name. But this doesn't make sense to me, because the two in the comic books have such an intertwined history that it doesn't make sense that he wouldn't remember who Sabretooth is. And so that is my main issue here. The two have a history of interacting with each other before and after his procedure, so to some level he would have known who Sabretooth was and recognized him. Of course, we kind of get the idea that at some level Wolverine subconsciously knows who Sabretooth is because he recognized the scent, I guess you could say, when Sabretooth attacks the truck in the Canadian Outback. But I was just kind of thrown off by this, and I was just left thinking, okay, this doesn't make sense, because the two do know each other and have a very close kind of rivalry and enemy relationship, because of course, I mean, Wolverine and Sabretooth are the kind of polar opposites of each other in the X-Men comic books. So I just kind of was not happy with that. I think it wouldn't have made a big change in the story overall for him to know who Sabretooth was. So I just didn't understand this choice in the film. Number 1, a plot hole. This has always bothered me about the film, and I would love to know your ideas and theories regarding this plot hole down below, so definitely give me your ideas on this topic. But basically, my issue comes from the idea of how does Magneto know his plan will work with Rogue? And this, of course, plays back into my issues with the fact that young Rogue is featured in this film. And let me elaborate on this and kind of get the initial kind of but wait argument out of the way. So, of course, he could have learned about Rogue from the articles regarding the boy being put into a coma. And the issue here is the boy was not a mutant, so there's no proof at this point that she is able to absorb not only the consciousness or life force of a person, but also the mutant abilities, and then use those mutant abilities in the cases where she makes contact with other mutants. And so how does he know this plan will work, not knowing this information? Of course, he could probably have theorized this, but that is a big theory and a big risk to jump off on, to go through all this trouble of kidnapping Rogue to try to execute this plan, especially considering he doesn't do any kind of practice run beforehand. He just kidnaps her and they go straight into it. He doesn't test to make sure that she can absorb and use his power to power the machine. So that is a huge issue. And I think this is why I kind of have an issue with the younger Rogue as well, because if they went with the traditional Rogue backstory, and Rogue was the same age as everyone else in the X-Men and was an established member of the team, we could have played up the idea of her history and her backstory and origins with Mystique, her being the adoptive daughter and raised for a time by Mystique, who then could have informed Magneto about her powers and what she can do, and then he would have known about that, and that would have made a lot more logical sense, and the stepping stones to explaining that would have been there. However, that's not the origin story we get for Rogue, and so again, I'm just left wondering, why did he make such a big risk, and how did he know that this would work, and all of that. Again, I would love to know your theories on this down below in the comments, because it's just not something that is ever fleshed out in the X-Men franchise. Now that is going to be it for my least favorite aspects of the film, so let's jump into the positives and my 5 favorite parts of the X-Men film. Number 5, wake up, Logan. I really just enjoyed the humor of this scene. I thought it was a lot of fun, and it gave us another dimension to Xavier that we don't really get to see a lot. We see Xavier as a kind of a serious leader of the group. He is very analytical. He is very focused on the goal of kind of helping, not kind of, but of helping the mutants of the world and find their place in kind of partnership with humanity. And so to see this scene where Logan wakes up and you hear Xavier's voice in his head, and Xavier's kind of toying with him and playing around and joking him and trying to like freak him out, it really kind of showed a very humorous, fun side of Xavier. I thought it was a very funny sequence of scenes, seeing Logan kind of panicky running through the halls of the mansion, and of course eventually leading him to Xavier in the classroom. I just thought it was a fun scene. It really stands out to me as something, and like I said, it just gives us a different version of Xavier that we don't get to see all the time, and I enjoyed that aspect of it. Number 4, a small central cast. Now, of course, I already complained about the fact that my favorite X-Men weren't featured or featured heavily in the film, but I do think that Fox made a smart move here and only featured a small circle of the group, and really focusing on the main core team members of the X-Men, and even on the Brotherhood side of things, only giving them a few members as well. I think it really allowed them to explore the characters in a great way without having to worry about doing a ton of character development and introducing them. And of course, they did do a good job of kind of sprinkling in references to other heroes and characters in the background. I mean, honestly, I would consider the appearance of Bobby in this film a reference to Iceman, because he's not really ever fully established, but even in the background we see other characters. We see in one of the classroom scenes a shot of Jubilee. We see other characters around in the X-Mansion that have somewhat recognizable traits, and so it is nice that they did that while still kind of focusing on characters to really give us a good development of the characters without having to overload us with exposition and explanation of who all these characters were. And then they can do a good job of then setting up and introducing additional characters moving forward and kind of just building on their roster, which is what they ultimately did. And I think that was really smart, and I think it's something that we really need to look forward in the MCU future of the X-Men as well, and seeing that same policy used, maybe with a different core team, but still focusing on a small cast and then building it up from there. Number 3, an introduction to mutants. I think this film does a really good job of introducing what mutants are to the general population, for those who may not be as familiar with the comic books and what mutants exactly are. And we see this first in the surfacing of the powers of Magneto at Auschwitz when he bends the gate when separated from his parents. This is then mirrored in a different way when we see Rogue gain her powers when she has her first kiss with the boy. And from here we jump into a lecture from Jean explaining how powers surface and how they tend to happen at adolescence at a heightened stressful time, thus giving us the example and the explanation of how this happens. And I think that was a really smart choice in the story development of this film, to give us really that clear example and explanation process so that we understand how the mutant gene works and where it comes from and all of that. And I think it was a really kind of smart way of introducing even Jean and Xavier as these kind of experts on the topic as well. So I just was really impressed with that, and I think it also was smart, really giving us two very different examples of that surfacing process, where we saw a situation with Magneto where it's a high stress, very tense, scary moment for him, and that's when his power surface. And then also something as simple as just being nervous and being inside your head and stressed out about something as simple when you look back on it as your first kiss, but in that moment it's such a intense time that would make sense as well for your powers to surface during that. So I just think it's really kind of interesting how they did that and how they mirrored it between two characters and gave us a couple explanations on all that process. And I think it was really smart to do that, again, for the general population who may not be as familiar with the X-Men and mutants and what they are and how that whole process works. Number two, the casting. I think Fox did a fantastic job here on casting the characters. Now, of course, not everyone was a knock out of the park, grand slam casting job, but for the most part, I think it was really fantastic. And of course, the MCU and Marvel Studios gets a lot of credit for doing such great jobs of casting and finding actors to perfectly portray the characters that they're supposed to represent. But I don't think Fox and the X-Men get as much credit for what they have done with their casting. Because, I mean, just look at Hugh Jackman as the Wolverine, Patrick Stewart as Professor Xavier, and Ian McKellen as Magneto. I mean, those are perfect embodiments of the characters, and to this day, at least I feel that those pretty much are synonymous with the comic book version of the characters. When I think of those characters, I think of the film adaptation. And even though I don't like Cyclops, I have to give a little bit of credit to James Madison here for his portrayal of Cyclops, because he perfectly portrayed every aspect of Cyclops I dislike. And so I think they did a really, really good job of selecting the characters here, or the actors to play the characters here. And I kind of, again, goes back into what I just mentioned about the small central cast. Because it was a smaller cast, they were able to focus on finding really good actors to play all the different characters. So I just have to give a major kudos to the production team here on the casting of this film. Number one, it's the X-Men. As I've mentioned a few times in this video already, the X-Men were my first major introduction into Marvel comic books, and that's really what started my fandom of the entire world that is not only Marvel but comics in general. Because if it wasn't for this series back in the 90s, I would have never jumped into the world of being a superhero nerd. Well, probably would have, but not as early and probably not as much as I did. So this film, being one of the first major superhero films of my lifetime, was such a big moment. I was so excited, and honestly, for a lot of things regarding this first film especially, it could do no wrong because it was an X-Men film and it was my favorite characters from the comic books. And so for me, I loved this movie really and truly for this aspect alone, and I was so excited for this movie for that same reason. So I had to put this on the list, because if it wasn't for the fact that this was the X-Men, I may not have been as excited for this film. And it's really what set the bar for me as far as the superhero genre films of the time, because it was Marvel. I had seen, of course, the Batman movies and stuff that before, but it just, those never really were as exciting to me because they were DC and I wasn't as big of a Batman fan. So to finally see Marvel movies coming to the big screen as a younger, I think gosh, how old was I? In my teens, young teen, I don't remember now. Oh, and I don't want to do the math. But it was such just a big life moment for me as a nerd. So yeah, easy number one for me was just the overall excitement for the X-Men coming to the big screen. But I would love to hear from you guys. What are your favorite and least favorite aspects of this movie? And of course, you know, let me know your thoughts on the X-Men franchise as a whole. I'm always happy to hear that. I do plan to go through and work my way through all the films I haven't done. I do, of course, have a review of The Dark Phoenix. You can check it out up in the card because that has come out since I launched this channel. But I do plan to go through and do all the videos on the movies between this film and the closer of the Fox X-verse. And of course, the New Mutants is coming out soon. Films have started to have release dates again as the theaters are starting to reopen. So I definitely plan to go see that on opening day. Hopefully somewhere. I need to figure that out exactly which theaters are open and the availability and all that. But I'm very excited for that as well. So be expecting a video on that as well. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have set alerts to get all those future videos. And until then though, please give this video a like. I always appreciate it. It helps the channel so much when you guys give these videos a like. And until next time, I hope you have a marvelous rest of your day. Bye, friends.